Things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner in Antrim. Long delays heading northeast towards Belfast up the M1 from junction 2 to 1. Just before the A12 for breakdowns in the second lane of an accident and lane 3 causing queues past the scene. And in Lancashire, the M6 is down to a single lane northbound at junction 31, the A59 exit east of Preston following a multi-vehicle collision. There are long queues back along both the M61 and the M65 as a result. On the Surrey stretch of the M25, the two inside lanes are blocked anti-clockwise at the Cobham Services. Emergency repair works are underway between the A3 and Leatherhead, taking about an hour back to the Staines bypass. And heading west away from Portsmouth on the M27, one lane shut just before the Fareham exit for emergency repairs. Long queues back onto the Havant bypass, and London Overground can't run Surrey Quays to Clapham Junction because of a 40 train at Denmark Hill. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
We've blown the budget by giving you the chance to win a totally terrific £20,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer spectacular. You could use that cash to splash out on a holiday, make the garden glam, buy a new car, or just save it for a rainy day. Whatever you'd spend £20,000 on, make sure you don't miss the chance to make it yours. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from tonight,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections.
We'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from tonight at midnight on GB News.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very good evening to you and welcome to Farage with me, Martin Daubney, standing in for Nigel tonight. Coming up on tonight's show, we'll speak to GB News' Patrick Christies, who was at the scene in Peckham earlier today, which ended with a number of arrests after protesters and police clashed as the Home Office began the transfer of asylum seekers to the Bibby Stockholm barge in Dorset. Next up, we'll head to Ireland as they plan to send police officers to the border to stop migrants entering the country, intensifying the row with the UK. And guess where? They put those asylum seekers from a tented city into a luxury hotel. We'll have that exclusive video. And after the carnage and violent clashes at university campuses in the USA over the past few days, we'll look at the pro-Palestine groups now setting up camp in universities across Britain. All that and more after your news with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much, and good evening to you. It's just after 7 o'clock. The headlines this hour. More than 700 migrants have arrived in the UK after crossing the Channel in a single day. That's a new record for the year so far. Home Office figures show 711 people made the journey in 14 boats on Wednesday, suggesting an average of 51 people per boat. And that brings the total number who've made the crossing since January to nearly 8,300. That's up 34% compared to the same time last year. Meanwhile, police have arrested 45 people after a large group of protesters blocked a coach to stop it leaving with migrants on board. Footage showed officers surrounding the bus and removing several protesters, while others joining the demonstration sat in the road. The bus was supposed to take 7 migrants to the Bibby Stockholm barge in Dorset, but eventually left without them. Downing Street has called the protests today as unacceptable. A samurai sword attacker has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 14-year-old schoolboy in north-east London. Daniel Angerin was fatally stabbed on Tuesday morning as he made his way to school. Marcus Monzo, who's a Spanish-Brazilian dual national, is also charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and injuring 4 other people when he broke into a house where a family was sleeping. The 36-year-old's been remanded in custody and he's next due to appear at the Old Bailey. Well, polls are open for a few more hours in local elections, which are taking place in many parts of England and Wales. Seats are up for grabs on 107 local authorities, while there are also votes for mayors, some police commissioners, and there's a by-election in Blackpool South. Voting in many parts of England and Wales ends tonight at 10 o'clock. In the US, President Joe Biden has called for order on college campuses after violent clashes between police and protesters. In California, hundreds of riot police moved in on pro-Palestine protesters in Los Angeles, and police there say they've made hundreds of arrests during crackdowns on those demonstrations. Meanwhile, here in the UK, students have also set up their own sit-in camps in protest against Israel's war with Hamas. Students in Sheffield, in Leeds, Newcastle and in Bristol set up tents outside their campus buildings, with organisers suggesting those demonstrations could spread across the UK. And finally, before we head back to Martin in Westminster, we've heard that today was the warmest day of the year so far in all 4 home nations, despite more warnings of storms and flooding to come. England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland all recorded a temperature above 20 degrees Celsius, and the peak temperature was 23.4 degrees recorded in Santon Downham in Suffolk. Meanwhile, 2 buildings in Sussex were damaged overnight by lightning, and a care home was also hit, causing damage to its roof. And the storm overnight also damaged a university building in Chichester and disrupted power supplies. Those are the headlines. More at 8 o'clock. Until then, you can sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the QR code there on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. Now, the Home Secretary has insisted that protesters will not stop migrants being removed from hotels after a group slashed the tyres of a coach set to transport them to the Bibby Stockholm barge earlier today. Hundreds of protesters wearing COVID face masks surrounded the vehicle outside the Best Western Hotel in Peckham, south-east London, just down the road from where I live, to try and prevent the migrants' removal. Well, after more than 6 hours of protesters blocking the way, the coach eventually managed to leave with a police escort, but without a single illegal migrant on board. Well, our very own Patrick Christies was on the scene this morning and joins me now. Patrick, I've seen the footage. You certainly got stuck in. You were on the front line. Tell me what you saw.
Yeah, it was quite an astonishing scene, actually, Martin. I'll be showing our viewers at 9 p.m. everything that happened on that day. By the time I arrived there, the protesters and activists were already surrounding the bus. They'd slashed the tyres, they'd wedged bikes underneath it, and it was an increasingly volatile atmosphere. I'm just going to throw to one of 2 clips that I'll bring to you now, which encapsulates a little bit of what was going on.
There's an individual being carried into a police van here. Shouts of "shame on you." See, this is an incredibly tense atmosphere here. That individual was pushed into the streets. There's another man on the side. I saw it. Yeah, and it is on film, yes. OK.
There's a lot more of that, but in amongst all the melee, and there, like I was saying, there's a lot more footage than this, Martin, but in amongst the melee, unfortunately, my cameraman was assaulted. He was hit in the back of the head, and we do have some footage here of the aftermath of that.
This individual has just assaulted a GB News cameraman and is going to be arrested by police as it currently stands. As you can see, the police appear to have just let him walk off. Keep rolling, Ben. Keep rolling, Ben.
Yeah, that man was allowed to just simply wander off. What we witnessed was basically mob rule, to be honest with you, Martin. There wasn't any riot gear or police horses in sight, unlike certain other events recently that we've all seen. As you've said, that bus did eventually leave under a police escort, but without anybody on it.
Now, Patrick, I know this area well. In fact, it's just down the road from me. That hotel used to be an Only Fools and Horses tourist hotel before it was taken over by asylum seekers. In fact, my missus once stayed there when she got locked out. Now it's full of bikes in the forecourt. And what we saw today, Patrick, scenes were replicated from June 2022, a couple of summers ago. In fact, a mob in Peckham, just around the corner from this, surrounded a riot van that was attempting to remove a Nigerian who had illegally overstayed his visa. Patrick, back then, the police did absolutely nothing. The mob won once again. Was today, Patrick, in your opinion, having been there, finally 45 arrests were made in the end, but was today precipitated by the fact that the police just stood off and did nothing?
Yeah, the police had been there for hours before, initially surrounding the bus with the protesters still essentially doing the arm locks around it. I kept waiting for the police to move in and to do something and for us to get that on film, and that basically never really happened. When the police did get people in vans, and again, we've got this on footage, those police vans would also be surrounded in scenes that you alluded to there from earlier in Peckham. The problem was that this was allowed to become much bigger than it would have been if it was nipped in the bud quickly. You're looking at footage there of the police standing around. Now, I appreciate they've got a difficult job to do. I really do, and everyone's got their camera phones out. But by standing around and letting this thing swell, letting this thing become a bigger thing, what will happen now is this will embolden other people. And the police, whether it's... I mean, I'm assuming, I can only assume, Martin, this is because they're not getting clear orders from above to actually go in and act and detain people, but there was just a lot of standing around and not a lot of action. And it was volatile, there was criminal damage being committed, and there were people assaulting other people. So it does beg the question, what do you have to do in order to actually have a bit more police action?
And, of course, Patrick, we all know in Britain we have a right to protest, fundamentally built into our constitution, into our democratic way of life. Nobody is saying we are not allowed to protest. But as you said there, Patrick, I believe the tyres were slashed and a scooter was thrown underneath it, preventing this vehicle from going away, not by peaceful protest, but by outright vandalism.
Yeah, and you've also just got the mass disruption as well. So an entire road was blocked. When we got there, it was still initially open, but as the crowds grew and as more police officers attended, the arterial road through Peckham, which is a very busy part of London, was completely shut off as well. So you've got people there breaking the law on numerous different fronts. Of course, Martin, I did ask a few of them whether or not they'd had to take the day off work for this. Nobody said yes.
Now, Patrick, I know this area. In fact, when a local beauty salon was, there was a protest outside there. That was Peckham Hair and Cosmetics. There was a huge protest. I went to that one, Patrick. Somebody told the protest there that I was from GB News. I was recognised. I was very quickly surrounded, Patrick. It got very tasty very quickly. Did you feel that once GB News was mentioned that you felt and your cameraman felt an immediate peril?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously I've got a bit of experience doing these things now with some of the pro-Palestine protests as well. There is definitely a crossover, by the way. I mean, the amount of pro-Palestine flags and badges that you're seeing on those, I suspect that there was, well, I've got a very good indication, Martin, as well, that some of the kind of usual Just Stop Oil activists were also involved in this. There is a crossover in that Venn diagram of individuals there. What I will say is that they're just generally hostile towards the media, OK? So it's not just a GB News thing. However, once they do find out your GB News, yes, they do tend to kick off. The way I view it is this, and everyone can make their own minds up later on from, the incredible footage that we've got. But if they want to be portrayed in a particular light, then they can do that to themselves. I was having conversations with individuals, and when people then say, well, where are you from? You're from GB News. If they then choose to kick off, then that's the impression they are giving to the world. That's not my fault. I've not done that. I'm perfectly happy to stand there and have normal conversations as that footage bears out.
Yeah, we've got some footage here we can show now, Patrick, of that protest at Peckham Hair and Cosmetics. You recall the owner of this shop was forced into hiding, an Asian-owned business, after he grappled a customer who he claimed was attempting to shoplift. That business was forced to close down for many days. In fact, to my knowledge, the business owner has never returned to work in that shop. A very, very volatile atmosphere. And I put it to you, on those streets Patrick, around Peckham and in many parts of London, many parts of Britain, it's starting to feel now that the tail is wagging the dog, that the mob is in control and the police are simply afraid to intervene.
That group of people was controllable. It could have been controlled. You know, it was people essentially sitting around a bus, and you had points there, it felt like just as many police as protesters. So it was possible. It was doable. There was, in my view, a choice made at some point to not do that much about it. I am not privy to the same kind of intelligence as the police were. Maybe there was method to their madness. But I think what a lot of people will wonder is why is it that if you are perhaps backing a certain cause and doing certain things and behaving in a certain way, you will get that kind of lenient treatment from the police. There was no mask dispersal order. We saw that on St George's Day. They tweeted that out. Everyone there's covering their identity. They can say and do what they want. And there did not appear to be a massive appetite, Martin, to get that bus moving and to enforce what is, may I add, government policy.
Indeed, one rule for them, one rule for everyone else. And the full exclusive tonight on Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11. As ever, Patrick, first to the scene and fearless. Good work. Top man. Now let's turn to Kevin Saunders, who's the former Chief Immigration Officer in Calais for UK Border Force, who joins us from Lincolnshire. Always a pleasure to speak to you, Kev. We saw today, quite simply, a dispersal order. They were attempting to get seven illegal immigrants, asylum seekers, to the Bibby Stockholm. The mob descended. Kevin, I've got a question for you. A lot of people have been saying to me earlier on my show, how did the mob find out? Is there some sort of leak, do you think, going on?
That's exactly the question that I've been asking. How the hell did the mob find out what was going on? Because I suspect that somebody somewhere has spoken to the media about it, because otherwise, how would they know? It's astonishing. But it's absolutely outrageous, Martin. It really is. You cannot have a mob rule in southeast London. In fact, where...
Kevin frozen. Kevin's frozen, not a problem. What he was about to say was, I think, and I've been inundated with emails all day on my show, you know, how did this information leak out? How is it that every time there seems to be a police raid, we saw it before, as I said, in June 2022, an immigration van turned up to perfectly legally, within the constraints of our law, remove a Nigerian from the area who'd overstayed his visa, and hey presto, lo and behold, a mob turned up. 200 protesters turned up that time, and they surrounded a van and they prevented that solitary individual being removed from the area. That emboldened the mob, I believe, today. And the same tactics were done. They simply blocked the pavement and they wouldn't even get 7 illegal asylum seekers to the Bibby Stockholm barge, if indeed that was where they were going. Who's telling them? How do they know? I think there are big questions that need to be answered on this story. Now, coming up, we'll head over to Ireland to find out what's happened to the asylum seekers who created a tent city in Dublin. It's now been destroyed, but where have they gone? We'll find out next. We've got some exclusive video footage to show that these people that once lived in a tent are now living the high life. This is Farage with me, Martin Daubney, on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the quaint Derbyshire village of Sudbury, there's a storm brewing between the local football club and the National Trust. This grass field might seem unremarkable, but for hundreds of years it's been part of the Sudbury Hall estate, playing host to the village football and cricket matches. Now the National Trust are planning to put an end to that tradition in the name of biodiversity, with plans for trees and plants where the football club play. Some worry it breaks a memorandum of wishes from the late Lord Vernon, whose family have lived here since 1660. Manager of Sudbury FC Tom Crutchley says he's upset at the decision.
Naturally disappointed. We've been here, this is our 9th year. You know, we've put a lot of effort into here to keep playing, to maintain it. I'm from the village originally, so personally it was, it is very upsetting.
MP for Derbyshire Dales Sarah Dines says the National Trust aren't respecting the history of the site.
I feel they're trampling over the wishes of historic owners who gave up this wonderful site for the nation. And for over 100 years, people have played football and cricket here. It's incredibly sad. Incredibly sad. And it's against the wishes of a lot of people locally who've written to me from the village.
Sudbury Hall lives under the branding of the Children's Country House, a decision which Dines says is disrespectful to the history of the estate.
I mean, this is fake to make it into a children's theme park. It's almost a reimagining. And in fact, that's the very words it says on their website. The house is reopened. It's been reimagined. I don't want our heritage to be reimagined. I think the National Trust has been captured by people who have different ideas than most people in this country.
Whilst the public will still be able to roam these historic grounds, the village feels like a legacy is being snatched away. Jack Carson, GB News, Sudbury.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, standing in Martin Dawdley. It's 18 minutes past 7. Got some of your feedback quick off the mark to that original story there about the shocking scenes in Peckham, where a mob surrounded a coach and prevented it taking 7 asylum seekers allegedly to the Bibby Stockholm. Viewer says this absolutely disgraceful police farce. St George's Day police had riot gear. Today the police allowed the mob to rule. You know, it's undeniable that often is the case. I was on the Armistice today. Protests out there. The police were very quickly tooled up for that one, and they were very quickly tooled up on St George's Day. Very, very different tactics. Kettling, coming onto the crowd. Today, it almost looked like they were standing around bored and simply watching it as it went on. Tyres were slashed, vehicles were put underneath that coach, a human blockade formed around it. As Patrick Christie said, he was there for that build-up. That crowd could have been dispersed much, much earlier. That didn't happen. It emboldened the crowd, and that's what led to this complete gridlock of the entire area. Not a single one of those asylum seekers was able to get away today. Colin adds this: I told Rishi Sunak that he would never get these people on the plane. You know, a lot of people have been saying, are all of these delaying tactics simply part and parcel of where we're about to head next? The Rwanda bill got through. It staggered through in the end. But are we about to see the charities, the NGOs, the Home Office, more of that later in the show, the entire system, the judiciary, the media, the Linacarites, the Lovies, are they going to step up now to do the job to finish it off? Ellen adds this: these protesters should be arrested for causing an obstruction. If the police are incapable of dealing with them, then get the army in. Strong words there, Ellen. And another viewer adds this: there is certainly a leak from the Home Office. I put that to Kevin Saunders from Border Force earlier. On my show earlier, people were saying, how on earth did the protesters know that as if by magic this coach would turn up to that hotel at that time, and they were able to form an effective blockade? A lot of people, Kevin Saunders included, who, if you recall, used to be a chief of immigration at Border Force, he thinks it seems like there surely is some kind of leak. How do they know to be in that precise location at that precise time to do their work? And if you recall, I said before the break, in the same postcode in Peckham, just down the road from where I live, in June 2022, a van which was attempting to legally remove an asylum seeker who'd overstayed his visa, a Nigerian man, 200 protesters surrounded a van, prevented that from leaving. We saw similar scenes in Glasgow. And the thing is, the more of these things that go on, the more they will get emboldened to do the same. Now, John adds this: mob rule cannot be allowed to prevail, as my late father used to say. Perhaps it is time we had a National Guard. You know, a lot of people say often, don't they, on this channel, John, now, where is that discipline gone? Where is that social cohesion? How come so many people walked past that without doing anything about it? Now, Louise says this: the Metropolitan Police showed yet again how useless they are today at Peckham. But, you know, Patrick Christie's added, they're caught between a rock and a hard place. It's easy to blame the officers on the ground. But is the big question the orders from above? Are they not being told to move in? That's the point. Another one says this: the country is just a mess. It is one thing after another. We need to sort this out. Martin says, unfortunately, this country has gone to the dogs. This government and the police should have stopped these protests when they started. Now, moving on, let's turn our attention to Scotland now, where Kate Forbes has confirmed that she will not run to be the next leader of the SNP. Now, Scotland's former Finance Secretary said that the only way to deliver urgent change in Scotland is through John Swinney's leadership, and that is exactly who she will now be supporting. Well, the SNP MSP rounded off her statement and said, you can be certain that delivering on the priorities for which we have together advocated in recent years has been at the heart of today's decision. Well, Tony Maguire, our Scotland reporter, sent this report for us.
Good afternoon. I am here still outside Holyrood Parliament in Edinburgh, and not long ago we heard that Kate Forbes, last year's runner-up to Humza Yousaf in the SNP leadership race, will not be seeking a run again this year. This just came hours after we heard from John Swinney, Nicola Sturgeon's former Deputy First Minister, who indeed will be looking to replace Humza Yousaf. Now, he himself was actually previous leader of the Scottish National Party and led the SNP into a European election back in 2003, which unfortunately at the time did not work out so well for him. But he will be looking for a second bite at the cherry now, and you know, he brings with himself a huge support from the SNP party in and of itself. Now, what is interesting is he has also recognised the merits, the qualities, if you like, of Kate Forbes, and he was using language to describe her like intelligent and creative, and it sounds very much like he has her pegged for a real top spot in his government if and when he is elected as the leader. Now, we're about halfway through the nominations process. I've got to say, over the last few days, there were some other names, smaller names like Neil Gray and Jenny Gilruth, which very quickly lined up behind John Swinney, along with the rest of Humza Yousaf's cabinet, quite frankly. And if any other names were to come out to stand against John Swinney, well, I think it's safe to say that they would be coming out of left field. Now, Kate Forbes, she identified that actually, well, on paper, they have very different views. John Swinney is very much, you know, dare I say it, the continuity candidate. And Kate Forbes this time hasn't used her big phrase from last year, continuity won't cut it, and it looks like she's going to give it a chance. She's actually identified some things that she has in common with John Swinney, and she hopes that they can work on them together, things like the net zero target, things like the economy, and very much work together to bring Scotland ever closer to, of course, their unified goal of independence. But for now, the first big test on the horizon is, of course, that general election. But yet, on Monday next week, we'll find out whether there has been any other nominations. But it looks like today could have been Humza Yousaf's final FMQs, and next week, around this time, we could be recognising John Swinney as Scotland's next First Minister.
And there we have it. Anybody hoping for an end to the muck-woke politics north of the border might be slightly disappointed. John Swinney basically is a continuity candidate. Here's a guy who voted for gender recognition self-ID for 16-year-olds. Of course, Kate Forbes, however, actually believes in Christianity. She's a Bible-reading Christian who's much more critical of the trans ideology, much more critical of things like same-sex marriage. She didn't didn't succeed to become leader last time, and now she's stood aside. Will it mean yet more of the same north of the border? Of course, we'll keep all eyes on that story throughout the developing days. Now, moving on, the diplomatic row between the UK and Ireland over asylum seekers is rumbling on. And a plan by Ireland to send police officers to the border to stop migrants entering the country sparked a furious row between Rishi Sunak and the Irish Prime Minister. Well, tensions escalated further as Rishi Sunak asserted that the UK has no obligation whatsoever to accept the return of illegal migrants from Ireland. And despite vehemently advocating for an open border, if you recall, during Brexit negotiations to preserve the peace process, well, Ireland's decision to deploy police officers to the borders raises serious amounts of eyebrows. So despite all the pontificating during the Brexit negotiations, I have to ask, has Ireland miraculously managed to discover its hard border? Well, to explain this seeming contradictory stance from the Irish government, I'm pleased to be joined now down the line by the president of the Irish Freedom Party, Herman Kelly. Herman, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. So, Herman, let's start with this notion of, we heard 100 police officers may be deployed by the Republic to the border. They seem to have suddenly developed a taste for protecting their border, Herman. Where did that come from?
The Irish government doesn't give a damn about protecting the Irish people, Irish sovereignty or Irish territory. The Irish government just last week, and you covered this in the news, that they sent the police force, the Gardaí, to pretty much beat up local people who were very concerned about the security and safety of their local area. And really, we saw scenes which were virtually unheard of in Ireland in the last number of decades post the Troubles, of it was like a cross between RoboCop and RUC, I'm sorry to say, that they really beat into local people who all they wanted to do was voice concerns and say that they didn't want large numbers of unvetted males planted in their area because they had grave concerns about the security of their community. And the whole thing, yeah, go ahead, Martin.
There you go.
Yeah, with a hard border, yeah, they demanded, no, we want an open border. The problem is with the Irish state is they don't want, seemingly, they have no functioning deportation system in Ireland at the minute. I think last week it came out, Helen McEntee, that 7,300 people were supposed to be deported. Less than 100 since 2023 have been deported. So it's very clear there's no functioning deportation centre, and anybody who reaches the island of Ireland can come in and they get loads of free stuff. I actually visited a hotel there on yesterday, and it was unbelievable, the facilities that these people had.
Yeah, in fact, Herman, let's turn now to that footage that you sent in to the Farage show. Yesterday, the tented city was cleared from central Dublin. A few weeks ago, it was cleared, and the asylum seekers in that city, tented city, simply walked back into Dublin. This time, Herman Kelly, they were taken to a very different location. Explain to viewers what we're seeing on screen now. Where did they find themselves? Looks rather plush.
They found themselves in City West Hotel in the west of the city. I believe it's 1,200 beds. It's one of the biggest, I think it is actually the biggest hotel in Dublin. Very salubrious. I walked around it. They had a golf course, which is only for residents. They have large pools. The rooms are fantastic. The people there are entering into the conference centre. There's a leisure centre, there's a swimming pool, there's golf courses for residents only. So Irish people are paying for this, and yet they're not allowed to use the facilities. They're for all the people who come in from around the world, Somalia, Afghanistan, Kurdistan, wherever, and they are treated like kings. They get free welfare, free medical care, free accommodation. At the same time, Irish people are means tested for all this free welfare stuff. And actually, I was walking around the car park. There's a lot of Ukrainian refugees there as well. And there were huge, very large Ukrainian SUVs in the car park. And let me tell you about a scheme that they have in Ireland at the minute. It's called ARP, Accommodation Recognition Payment, where Ukrainians get €800 tax-free to give to an Irish landlord, whereas an Irish person would have to pay €800 to the same landlord. That would be taxed. So if you're an Irish landlord letting out an apartment, of course you're going to take the Ukrainian, and it's discriminatory, we believe, against Irish people. There's a new scheme in the newspapers today that seemingly the Irish government is now going to spend a lot more taxpayers' money to buy up dilapidated houses to give to asylum seekers. So that means the Irish state will be using taxpayers' money to compete in the housing market against the Irish taxpayers.
Yeah, and Herman Kelly, that's exactly what we're seeing here on the mainland. And of course, nobody should deserve to live in a tent. We have a duty of care to protect and welcome the most vulnerable from around the world. Of course, nobody wants to see people suffer, but we see time and time again, do we not, Herman Kelly, that people seem to be living the life of Riley, especially in a luxurious hotel, which, as you said, very few people in Dublin could afford to even stay. And we have to leave it there. We've simply ran out of time. Herman Kelly, President of the Irish Freedom Party, thank you for joining us on Farage. Always a pleasure. Now, up next, Donald Trump is back at the Manhattan Criminal Court as his New York hush money trial continues, following recess yesterday, where the campaign trail in the battleground states of Wisconsin and Michigan. In a moment, we'll speak live to a former chief of staff to the United States Defense Secretary under President Donald Trump, Kash Patel. You're watching Farage on GB News.
Good evening. It's time for your latest GB News weather update, brought to you by the Met Office. There's going to be quite a bit of rain around tomorrow, but before then, the risk of some heavy thundery downpours overnight, in association with a front that's still lingering across central parts at the moment, and we do still have some blustery conditions because of an area of low pressure over the near continent. But I think it's the thundery downpours across central parts of England into Wales where we're most likely to see any issues. Some of the showery rain will continue as we go overnight, and we're likely to see a few bursts pushing in from the North Sea further north as well, but many areas towards the northwest of the UK staying dry, some clear skies, but for most a relatively mild start to the day tomorrow. As we go through tomorrow itself, then more rain to come across central parts of England, Wales, and some showers across northern England and into southern Scotland too. Some of these could be heavy and thundery. Lots of cloud and showery rain continuing across many areas, but towards the far north and the far south of the UK, we should have some decent dry and sunny weather. In the sunshine, it will feel quite warm, albeit temperatures not quite as high as they were today. As we look towards the weekend, and well, it is looking pretty messy. On Saturday, there's going to be quite a bit of cloud and outbreaks of showery rain across the northern half of the UK before some showery stuff is likely to push its way up from the south as we go through the day, and that could be heavy, possibly even thundery. More mixed weather to come as we go through Sunday into Monday. There will be some drier, brighter weather at times, but also plenty of showers as well. I'll see you again soon.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from tonight,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections,
we'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from tonight at midnight on GB News.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney. Now, Donald Trump is back in court today for the resumption of his New York hush money trial. And the judge in the case is considering 4 more alleged violations of Mr Trump's gag order today after fining him $9,000 for 9 breaches on Tuesday. The judge has also warned the former president he could face jail if he persists in bad-mouthing key participants. Well, to explain everything that's been happening and what to expect next, I'm delighted to be joined by Kash Patel, author of the book Government Gangsters. He's also a previous federal public defender and a former chief of staff to the acting United States Secretary of Defense under President Donald Trump. Wow, what an impressive CV you have, Kash. So today, Donald Trump came out ahead of the trial and he said what a ridiculous show trial this is. He called it a Biden trial. What happened next?
Well, I think one of the most shocking revelations, it's great to be with you, is that a central witness for the prosecution, our equivalent of the Crown Prosecution Services, was the lawyer to one of the women that was alleged to have received a hush money payment. And on the witness stand during the examination, he actually stated that the money that transferred from him to his client was not a hush money payment. This is much akin to going into a bank robbery case and having the witness identify the person sitting next to you as the actual culprit and not the one charged with the crime. So they're scrambling a little bit there because this has been built as a hush money trial for silencing other people, and their star witness just said that's not what happened.
And of course, Kash, Donald Trump also allied to the fact that he went to a packed rally in Michigan, Wisconsin. He was actually allowed to go and campaign. And he very clearly said that this show trial, the timing of it is specifically designed to keep him from being able to campaign. The timing is everything, he said.
Yeah, so the timing of this courtroom is going to take 4 to 6 weeks, but every Wednesday they have off per the judge's schedule. So Donald Trump is masterminding and orienting his campaign calendar to maximize how he can get out to the country. Michigan and Wisconsin are key battleground states. And when he's out there, he's talking about the things that are happening in the courtroom. You mentioned the contempt proceedings that caused a $9,000 charge for Donald Trump. You know, there is a rule in New York which says if you are a judge in the state of New York and any one of your relatives makes money indirectly from a prosecution or case being presented before you, you must recuse. This judge's daughter has made tens of millions of dollars from the information pouring out of his courtroom, and he refuses to recuse, and then he attacks Donald Trump's constitutional right to free speech. So what I think you see President Trump fighting for is not just his freedom of speech rights, but he's taking that on the campaign trail and say, they're doing this, you're next. And of course, it's a rigged system of justice, and I happen to agree with the president.
And Kash Patel, briefly, if we could, he also referred to the college protests going on across America. He called these people radical left morons who want the country to fail, and we will not allow this.
We're not going to allow the country to fail. These people are picking the side of a pro-terrorist organization rather than picking the side of America and being with our allies in Israel, and we cannot have that. Currently, Americans and Israelis and others are being held hostage by this organization, and Donald Trump doesn't support any movement for war that is pro that.
Kash Patel, an absolute delight to speak to you. Thank you for joining us on the Farage Show. Excellent to speak to you. Thank you. Now, moving on, the Rwanda plan has faced opposition every single step of the way, from the courts, the opposition, government ministers, the House of Lords, and of course from Nigel Farage himself. But despite its successful passage through Parliament, Rishi Sunak now faces his next battle, the civil service. Now, the Union for Senior Civil Servants is launching a legal challenge over the Rwanda plan through fears staff could be in breach of international law, a new attempt in grounding the Rwanda flights. So is it now time that we take radical measures and ensure civil servants are politically aligned with the government of the day? Or is this a fair response from the union? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Becky Smith, who's the Deputy Editor at Civil Service World. Thanks for joining us on the show, Becky. So this hinges around the fact that the union is claiming that if civil servants apply the Rwanda plan, they may be in breach of international law.
So the reason the FDA is challenging the legislation and is trying to bring this judicial review is it's mostly a technical thing. So the idea is that the European Court of Human Rights, if a European judge grants an injunction against a deportation flight, Ministers now, under UK law, have the ability to, ignore that, override that. And guidance that's just been put out instructs civil servants to follow ministers' instructions, which sounds fair enough, but the Civil Service Code requires civil servants to follow the law, which also includes international law. So the FDA's case is that this creates kind of a conflict in the responsibilities that civil servants have. So they're seeking clarity. They're not trying to stop the policy. They asked several weeks before the act was passed for wording in the legislation to address this. That wasn't put in, and so this is what their issue is.
OK, Becky, we just spoke to a former advisor to Donald Trump. In America, Donald Trump proposed policies to effectively hire and fire the federal staff in America, their equivalent of the civil service. He said that time after time after time, they stood in the way of his more conservative policies. Is there a case to be made that civil servants in the UK should back the government? They should be politically aligned with the policies of the day, because too often, Becky, we hear allegations that the civil service, the Home Office, seems to be rowing in a different direction to the government in power.
There's certainly been allegations, and especially in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, we've seen a really big change in the way that ministers and anonymous government figures have talked about the civil service in the press. There's been a lot of briefing against the civil service. Most of it has been proven unfounded. In this particular case, to be honest, it wouldn't solve your problem, because it would still have this conflict between the Civil Service Code and the legislation. So it doesn't matter how civil servants feel and how they politically align. There's still going to be this conflict which the FDA is trying to resolve.
But Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, Nigel Farage, practically every Conservative MP I talk to, they all do believe that no matter how they try and get legislation through particularly sensitive areas around immigration, there seems to be constant pushback from the Home Office, from the blob, as they may call them. Do you think that's fair, or is that harsh criticism?
I don't think it's correct necessarily. I think a lot of the pushback has come from groups outside government. Where it's come from civil service unions and civil servants, it's been about this worry that they will be breaching international law or international human rights. So I don't think political alignment comes into it. I think the civil service is often a very convenient target for ministers who can't get their legislation through, their policies through, and it's possibly quite a lazy way to find someone to blame for policies that you can't pass.
You know, Becky Smith, Deputy Editor at the Civil Service World. I think that's a fair point. No, maybe politicians are just blaming you guys when they just can't get their job done. It's great to hear both sides of the story. Becky Smith, thanks for joining us on the show. Now, in a moment, we'll discuss the growing number of pro-Palestine camps popping up at universities across Britain, trying to replicate the disorder on campuses in the United States. Will they succeed? You're watching Farage on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I don't think you can go and watch a Shakespeare play unless you already know it. It's almost like you have to understand the story and the characters, and perhaps have even done a bit of reading into it. Because if you went completely blind, especially in today's world where we don't speak in that kind of way, it is, I think, probably a bit alienating.
But Dawn is saying it is alienating at the moment because of the lack of representation.
You know, the actual phrasing they use, right, OK, the disproportionate representation propagated white, able-bodied, heterosexual, cisgender male narratives. I'm sure there's people sitting in a room going, what's the most ridiculous thing we can come up with today?
Yes.
But are really just chuck all these words at it, cisgender, and it's just insane. Of course, Shakespeare was what it was back in the day, and that's why it's mostly blokes and they're mostly white.
And lots of speculation that he was actually gay, isn't there? Because he never really saw Anne Hathaway very often and stayed away a lot of the time. I don't know, maybe he was a big
He might have been
icon.
transgender for all I know. I mean, I don't...
Biggins, I'm looking at you.
No, I think you're right. I mean, you know, I think that goes for the profession too. I mean, I do think I mean, I remember seeing Macbeth in London with Judi Dench and Ian McKellen, and it was one of the most exciting evenings ever. And it was a cold night at the Donmar Theatre, outside and inside, and that gave it atmosphere. There are certain things that you go along and see something else, and you think, I'll walk out in the interval.
Yeah. Macbeth is a sexy play, though.
Let's talk about, there's so many. Can I live to be 100?
Oh, this is depressing.
I think it is depressing. I like to stay here now. I don't want to live to 100.
don't say that. I'm right behind you.
I don't even want to. My father died at 63. That'll be me gone this year.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise and who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daubney. Now, history teaches that what starts in America so often arrives in the UK sooner rather than later, for good or for bad. Well, now, in a trend mirrored from protests across the USA, pro-Palestinian students have occupied several university campuses in the UK. And the students claim they are demonstrating against the conflict in Gaza. Tents have been erected outside buildings at universities in Leeds, Newcastle and Bristol, and also Sheffield, where we were earlier, with calls for donations of essential supplies. Marches and one-off protests have also taken place on other campuses, including a week-long encampment which has been established at Warwick University. And the UK demonstrations followed larger-scale protests at campuses across the USA, notably at Columbia University in New York, where over 1,000 protesters have now been arrested following clashes with the police. Well, Josh Kaplan, the head of digital at the Jewish Chronicle, joins me now in the studio. A delight to have you.
Thank you.
We saw chaos in America, campuses taken over, occupied, vandalised, the civil guard sent in, flash grenades even used, arrests made. Now it's come over this side of the pond. How does that make you feel, and what should we do about it?
Yeah, well, it's kind of embarrassing, really, isn't it? I mean, we used to make things in this country. Now we don't even make our own ideas. We simply import them from America. You know, it's exactly the same thing that happened during the BLM riots in 2020, when we kind of imported this American politics, and you had this insane thing where people who had previously been anti-austerity, they're now calling to defund the police. Like, there's not a huge amount of critical thinking involved here, is there?
Now, of course, we must support people's free right to protest, no matter if we agree or disagree. Otherwise, they'd stop us being able to protest about the attempted cancellation of Brexit and so on and so forth. However, some of the tactics have been unsavoury, to say the least, and we've seen actually an escalation towards some pure hatred in America.
Yeah, I think in America what's happened is quite honestly disgusting. I think the way that you've allowed this small minority to, you know, effectively dictate what peaceful students can do, I think is really awful. And I think the second that happens here, and the second that ordinary students are stopped from walking about campus, going about their daily lives, I think that's the point where we should just kick it all out.
And are students telling you, Jewish students, that they feel afraid now on British university campuses?
I think at the moment it's kind of watching and waiting, right? There's this kind of critical moment where, is it going to blow up in the way it's blown up in America, or is it going to just kind of fizzle away? And, you know, I think in Bristol there's about 4 tents. So hopefully it won't bloom into anything bigger. But if it does, then I think they would feel completely justified in being scared.
Now, we heard the mayor of New York saying that it turned nasty because outside influencers came in. We've seen the same in Britain. We've seen some spicy organisations getting involved and revving things up. Do you fear that that could happen here?
I think when protests get big enough, there's always a chance for people to kind of jump in and make it their cause. And I think the big problem with the Palestinian issue generally is that people want to jump on it because it's a popular cause that they think they can use to shoehorn in all the other sort of tin pot things they believe in.
Should we send in the cops, the same as they did in America?
I think it might be a bit too early. I think at the moment, let them embarrass themselves and then hopefully it'll fizzle out.
OK, well, thanks for joining us in the studio. Josh Kaplan, the head of digital at the Jewish Chronicle. Well, I'm delighted to say I'm now joined in the studio by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, of course, is doing the show directly after this. Jacob, what's on your menu, sir?
Well, what we're going to start with is Johnny Mercer saying that he would go to prison rather than reveal confidential information given to him by whistleblowers in relation to things that went on in Afghanistan. And this seems to me to be really important because people ought to have confidence that they can speak to journalists, their lawyer and their Member of Parliament about issues that are sensitive and not be revealed as the source of that information. And I'm worried that the powers that the judge has, and he has been given these powers by Parliament, to enforce Johnny to give the information is going too far, because if people can't have a confidential conversation, how can they get themselves represented? How can they get information across in a system that they may feel has failed, particularly, obviously, if they're whistleblowers? So we're going to start with that.
Yeah, and what's next?
Well, we're also going to be talking about the OECD's forecasts for the UK economy, which are
gloomy.
Of course they're gloomy. Of course they're gloomy. And the lady who's done them is just about to go off to be Deputy Governor of the Bank of England. And the Bank of England has just spent a lot of time trying to work out why all its forecasts are wrong. And it seems to me if they've been wrong for ages, getting advice from the OECD isn't particularly sensible. And then we're going to be talking to Joshua Sutcliffe, who's coming into the studio, who's the teacher who misgendered a pupil. And this is really interesting because everyone's view seems to have changed. Since the Cass report came out, there's been a sudden change.
Screeching U-turn.
Screeching U-turn. Even senior politicians who couldn't tell you know what a woman is and what a man is. So fascinating things have been happening. And so I'm going to be talking to him and finding out, A, what he's had to go through and where his legal challenge is at the moment.
And you're also, we speaking to Josh Kaplan a moment ago, you're also, I believe, addressing these protests of the pro-Palestinian mob on British university campuses. You listened into our conversation. What's your take?
Well, I agree with this point. Why can't we think up our own protests? This is not a matter that is indigenous to the UK. It's a US protest that we've decided to adopt. I spoke to somebody for GBN America earlier on today who was saying the anti-Semitism is really shocking and has tipped over into violence. So Jewish people have been injured, physically injured by some of the protesters and the outside influencers who are being paid, apparently, to get involved. And it's really important that doesn't happen here because free speech is so important. We never want the police to be going in to break up protests. That should only happen when people have broken the law, not just because they have a view that we don't like.
And on that matter, as I've got you here, can I ask you for your reaction to those protests we saw earlier in Peckham, when the vehicle, the coach that was making an attempt to get asylum seekers to the Bibi Stockholm, apparently had its tyres slashed, it was vandalised. What's your take on that?
Vandalism, slashing tyres is criminal damage. People who do that should be arrested. They should be charged, they should go through the courts. Standing in front of a coach is potentially a legal protest until you're moved on by a policeman. Slashing its tyres is against the law, and the full weight of the law should come down upon you.
Can I quickly ask you, one of the topics we covered on Farage tonight is, does the civil service run Britain? Of course, this is the civil servants, and they may be violating international law. Suddenly, their union is saying that time and time again. We've heard from Suella Braverman, from Priti Patel. Is, in your opinion, the Home Office, the civil service, rowing in a different direction to the government on immigration?
Well, I think the First Division Association for Civil Servants doesn't represent civil servants at all well. It doesn't like them being in the office, it doesn't like them doing any work, and when they are in doing work, it doesn't want them to do what the government expects of them. It's a hard left union that obstructs the activities of government and gives civil servants a bad name. So I think the FDA is really letting down its members. I actually worked with some superb civil servants who worked way over office hours, were committed to delivering the policy of the government, whether they agreed with it or not. And I think the FDA is just a bad lot.
Superb. Well, there he is. And that coming up next is State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Thanks for joining me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. First, though, it's time for your weather. And here's Alex Burkill.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. It's time for your latest GB News weather update, brought to you by the Met Office. There's going to be quite a bit of rain around tomorrow, but before then, the risk of some heavy thundery downpours overnight in association with a front that's still lingering across central parts at the moment, and we do still have some blustery conditions because of an area of low pressure over the near continent. But I think it's the thundery downpours across central parts of England into Wales where we're most likely to see any issues. Some of the showery rain will continue as we go overnight, and we'll likely see a few bursts pushing in from the North Sea further north as well, but many areas towards the northwest of the UK staying dry, some clear skies, but for most a relatively mild start to the day tomorrow. As we go through tomorrow itself, then more rain to come across central parts of England, Wales, and some showers across northern England and into southern Scotland too. Some of these could be heavy and thundery. Lots of cloud and showery rain continuing across many areas, but towards the far north and the far south of the UK, we should have some decent dry and sunny weather. In the sunshine, it will feel quite warm, albeit temperatures not quite as high as they were today. As we look towards the weekend, and well, it is looking pretty messy. On Saturday, there's going to be quite a bit of cloud and outbreaks of showery rain across the northern half of the UK before some showery stuff is likely to push its way up from the south as we go through the day, and that could be heavy, possibly even thundery. More mixed weather to come as we go through Sunday into Monday. There will be some drier, brighter weather at times, but also plenty of showers as well. I'll see you again soon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £20,000 in tax-free